I'm so excited. I'm just really excited because God has a plan and each of us are a part of it. And when I say I'm excited, what I want to facilitate for some that hear me say that Tuesday, Wednesday, probably if you talk to me on the telephone, I'm going to say that I'm excited about something. And I want you to understand where my excitement is coming from. It's coming from a place of the joy of the Lord is my strength. It's not coming from a place that Beth lives such an exciting life of continual opportunities to be excited about. No, not necessarily. But what's true is what the one thing that I'm excited about, and the reason I get to say that I'm excited is because I'm excited about my relationship with the Lord. And so I'm excited to get the opportunity. I get the opportunity in my Erica Jackson voice. She says she gets the opportunity to have this busy schedule, or not necessarily busy, but productive. And keeping it moving schedule, or to do great businesses, to have great businesses and multiple. She's a serial entrepreneur. And I was thinking of her this morning. I really was supposed to send her a text, but I was thinking of her this morning and how, with all the vast opportunities, every time I see her, she has joy. She has a beautiful smile. Her presentation is just awesome and amazing. I just want to say to you this morning, you can too say, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And you can say, I'm excited in the midst of challenges, in the midst of circumstances, in the midst of not being sure what's next. So today on Wellness Wednesday, I hope you're encouraged. I want to thank you for joining us. We're minus our awesome leader, Pamela, today. So she's taking a kind of a retreat today, if you will. And so we send our prayers her way. But for today, I want to pass over to our co-host, Jessica Banner, and then Christine Oswald. And Jessica's going to lead us today. So I'm just excited to be here in the number at GCBN. We're focused, determined, and intentional to put God back in business. And this is the year for us to stand. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to get us live on some other platforms.
Absolutely. Welcome. We are here in May in our third week as we've been talking about Joseph and his coat of many colors and a case study in family dynamics. But before we get started, I'd love for us to introduce ourselves. I'll get us started and then I'll let you introduce yourself, Christine. And so I'm Jessica Banner. I have a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. I have been counseling for about 17 years, did 10 of those years in mental health in a psychiatric hospital working with adults and adolescents, did a little bit of everything, ran a VA contract, did psych and substance abuse, helped some program structuring. And then I made a transition into pastoral counseling, where I strongly emphasize in trauma resolution work predominantly. But I am also making some pivots. I am trying to work on my first book and making some career decisions, moving a little bit more towards training, developing a training program for pastoral counselors with a team of people, and lots of things in the works. So we'll be excited to tell more about that as it presents itself. So, Christine?
I'm Christine Christine Oswald. I couldn't remember my name for a second. Going with my maiden name. It's been a long time ago. And so I have been providing soul care and been a soul healer for over 30 years. I'm the owner of Real Conversations, Christian life coaching and consulting. I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy with specializations in Christian sex therapy and Christian spiritual formation and direction. And like so many women on this panel, we have combinations of being ordained and being given the honor of doing pastoral care mixed with competent, excellent mental health care. And I work with women and couples. And I'm also an executive family pastor at our church here in Western Wisconsin, through which I do visioning, developing, staff development, and executive coaching. And we're so glad that you guys are here today. We are back in family dynamics, and today we get to talk about reconciliation and restoration, which is why so many of us got into what we have been doing for our whole lives on this panel. So it's a really exciting day.
We were discussing that. Yeah, absolutely. Miss Beth, would you like to introduce yourself? You're
I
muted.
can unmute. Yes, thank you for that opportunity. I'm the executive director and the founder of Georgia Christian Business Network. We just are going in almost next month, 6 months away from our 15th year anniversary of GCBN being in existence. We've come a long way, baby. Okay, my Carmen Caldwell voice. I having dinner with her tonight. God has a plan, y'all. And what I like to say in my intro is that when God gives you vision, provision belongs to him. If I've learned anything as the executive director and the founder of not only GCBN, but also God's People Ministry, our 501c3, which we started over 20 years ago, vision comes from God if it wants to be sustained. There's a lot of crooks and turns and challenges as you go through working the vision. I believe that what God allows is so that it can be James 4:8, drawing us near to him. Because sometimes when you're working a vision as an executive coach, I've learned that we can get ahead of God and we can get outside of God's will for what he's called us to do at that moment, for the vision. And sometimes we can feel as if the vision is ours. And so what I want to encourage you as a part of my introduction is however long you've been at the project or the opportunity of ministry or vision or business ownership that God has assigned for you, I want to encourage you the whole way of what we're doing this year is to make sure that you're sticking close to God and you're standing on his promises. But thank you for allowing me the intro. I'll be brief like that.
Absolutely. Um, So we've been talking about family dynamics. In the last couple weeks, we've been talking about parenting and sibling rivalry. To kick us off today, I'm going to let Christine read first from Genesis 37 and then Beth from Genesis 45.
Genesis chapter 37, verses 18 to 30. They spotted him, that would be Joseph, off in the distance. By the time he got to them, that's his brothers, they had cooked up a plot to kill him. The brothers were saying, "Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these old cisterns. We can say that a vicious animal ate him up. We'll see what his dreams amount to." Reuben heard the brothers talking and intervened to save him. "We're not going to kill him, no murder. Go ahead and throw him in this cistern out here in the wild, but don't hurt him." Reuben planned to go back later and get him out and take him back to his father. When Joseph reached his brothers, they ripped off the fancy coat he was wearing, grabbed him, and threw him into a cistern. The cistern was dry. There wasn't any water in it. Then they sat down to eat their supper. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites on their way from Gilead, their camels loaded with spices, ointments, and perfumes to sell in Egypt. Judah said, "Brothers, what are we going to get out of killing our brother and concealing the evidence? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let's not kill him. He is, after all, our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. By that time, the Midianite traders were passing by. His brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph with them down to Egypt. Later, Reuben came back and went to the cistern. No Joseph. He ripped his clothes in despair. Beside himself, he went to his brothers. "The boy's gone. What am I going to do?"
Thank you. Go ahead, Beth.
Okay, so I was trying to decide what translation I'm reading it from. So I have my Bible here. Of course, you know what that is, but I pulled up the ESV. So I'm going to read it from there. Genesis 45, 1-9. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the house of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Joseph said to his brothers, Come near to me, please. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, Thus says Joseph, your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry.
Thank you. Really excited about today. The last couple weeks we've been talking about some of the challenges that happen in families with parenting and parenting styles and things that can happen as with generational trauma and how that can play out in sibling rivalry. But today we get to talk about God's heart for reconciliation and restoration. So I love that we get to talk a little bit about the solution to some of the challenges we've been talking about. So we'll jump into Miss Pamela. She always writes the best scripts, so I'm going to honor that. So, she says reconciliation and restoration are distant but related concepts, both focusing on mending broken relationships, but with different nuances. Reconciliation is about restoring a relationship to a state of harmony after a conflict or a breach. It involves addressing the cause of the brokenness. Um, In this case study of the family dynamics, we have seen how a parent favoring one child over another can lead to sibling rivalry, and sibling rivalry can cause broken relationships. Today we learn that brokenness is not beyond repair. Today we learn about reconciliation and restoration, reunion and rebuilding. The family we are studying is that of Jacob, the father of Joseph, whom he gifted with an extraordinary tunic, leading his older sons to jealousy to the point of hatred. The biblical text reveals they showed their contempt by mocking his prophetic dreams. The disdain became murderous rage. And so in verse 18 and 19, now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. Fortunately, Reuben, the oldest, convinced the others not to kill him, but simply to place Joseph in a dry pit with the intent to rescue him. So, my first question to pose to the panel is, how does Reuben's behavior foreshadow reconciliation? Any thoughts, ladies?
It says in verse 22, Reuben planned to go back later and get him out and take him back to his father. I've always wondered what would have happened if that plan had happened. Like, how would it have gone down at the family dinner table if Reuben had gone and gotten Joseph out and brought him back to the family? But that's kind of our indication that as the reader, that maybe there's another end of the story. We don't quite know what's going to come, but we do know that the eldest brother, which in that time and in that culture would have been an extremely important role, the eldest legitimate son, um, that um, that he would have had more power than most. But Judah, as we see in a few verses later, also has a tremendous amount of influence over the brothers. And he didn't even seem fully convinced that the not kill him plan was even really going to take until he had the idea of selling him off to the Ishmaelites. And and then later on in Genesis, we see how it's Judah himself. So we kind of see this redemption bit in Judah's life that we're going to be getting to. Um, but that's kind of our first foreshadowing that there might be a different ending than Joseph being murdered by his brothers. But
Also, from my perspective, there's an indication there in that transaction that kind of like a knowing what Christine says, that something in the future is going to transpire, but also the knowing of, and I know this is maybe far stretch, but I got to tell you from last week's conversation that uh, there's some validity to what Joseph's saying. And just in case this guy's onto something, let's preserve his life. And then I think is also indicative of the the stack, what do you call it, the eldest, his being the eldest. And so all of that is, he's kind of like warning them without telling them, because there was so many opposing him, that he knew he had to be unique in how he approached it, so that it didn't rouse them up to start towards him even. So that's the way I see it a little. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting, as I was thinking about that, Reuben is such a microcosm of us as humans, right? Like I was thinking about how he's living in the tension of there are these dreams. Like these are believers. Like Jacob believed in the Lord. His family believed in the Lord, right? These are the heads of the tribes of of Israel. And um they don't know it yet, but it's coming, right? And it's so interesting, this tension of I know the Lord, but to be caught in my humanity. And we see that play out in Reuben, right? There's this sin of the woundedness. One of the things we talk about in my team with the training we're developing and talking about trauma so often is how so often the enemy has used woundedness as the open gate to sin, because a wound is so often where we allow the agreement with the plans of the enemy, consciously, unconsciously, knowingly, unintentionally, because so often an unattended wound is what opens the door for me to be in agreement with the plan of the enemy. And that causes us to sin, right? And so I think we see that tension in Reuben. There's a part of him, just from reading the text, that understands things of the Lord, honor, respect, family. Um, but there's also the tension of the wound. And we see that in him. And I think that's where we see the potential for reconciliation, because really in scripture, the whole of scripture, God's whole story is just that. We live in this tension of the spiritual part of ourselves and the human part of ourselves, and our self-will versus his will. And we see that wrestle in Reuben, which I think sets us up, because all of scripture and all of God's story is about reconciliation. But I think we see it very vividly in this tug of war inside of Reuben.
yeah, and Reuben being the eldest, I mean, at this point, he would have most likely been close to middle age. And so
Mhm.
that adds a different, in terms of your life developmental stages, and he would have already had children. I mean, and all of that's a little different than some of the younger brothers with the zeal and the anger and the rage, because we struggle more with different sins, I think, at different stages of development on our arc.
Mhm.
Um, and and Ruben being a little older, I think he would have been at a different place in terms of what his triggers would have been,
Mhm.
because he would have not just been a son at this point, he would have also been a father.
Yeah.
Um, and that shifts things.
I always think about his birth order too. We've been talking a lot about birth order in this series of this month, and being a firstborn, and especially in that culture, carried a lot of weight. Like you and Beth alluded to, he would have technically been in alignment to be the inheritor and be the patriarch of the family behind Jacob. And so, how he perceived and how he had been trained up would have been to have a larger scope, because he can't, when you're stepping in that kind of leadership, you can't just be self-focused. And so I think we definitely see some of the cultural context of birth order and the culture working its way out in there too. Um, so we'll move on and talk a little further. There are times that family conflict is so intense that members are estranged for years. Sadly, that estrangement may last to the point that restoration is not possible because one or more members die before it happens. It seems that was destined to happen for Jacob's sons. So before Reuben could save Joseph, something happened that at the time seemed like a disastrous event. So we see in verses 25 through 28, and they sat down to a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. What about the brothers' ultimate decision not to kill Joseph? Uh, Portends restoration.
Definitely leaves the door open for it because it's, you know, hopefully they can connect later on. And we as the reader know that this is part of God's bigger plan. For them at the time, they only were in it. You know, it's the beauty of looking back on a life. You're like, oh, that's where the Lord was at work. But, you know, for them, and just like us, when we're in the moment, we can know God's good and he's got a good plan and we're part of it, but we have no idea where he's going with it.
It's so true. And I mean, evidently, if they killed him, that's the end of the story, you know. And so, but the opportunity is the hope that I feel from um as long as, like Jessica just read to us, if they're alive, the greater opportunity for restoration in relationships and families is good. You know, Lisa Muth posted something this morning that was really, I listened the whole 45 minutes on the sermon or something like that. Is what is our call, our true call to do in this Christian walk? And that is to be a witness. And I'm in being very brief about a powerful message that I listened to this morning. But three opportunities why we're to be that witness is just simply because it's commanded. Secondly, because we love him. And thirdly, because we love others. And those three things are repeated in that 40-minute span that it brings to mind right now, right here, is when we are going through opportunities, even and I mean, I felt like Jessica was reading my story this morning, and it being estranged even as I speak, unfortunately, with blood relatives. I'm not talking about in my westerns 2 and 3 times removed cousins. I'm talking family. I'm talking sisters, sister in loves, you know. I'm talking that close, estranged. But the opportunity is those three. If you have hope, and the wind is hope, and God gets your attention like he did in the case of Reuben, if he gets your attention, there remains that hope. It may be outside of your ability to do anything more than what he did. That didn't necessarily necessitate reconciliation at that point. Are you following me? Yet he was obedient to what God put in his spirit to do, that created space years down the road to bring about reconciliation. Because everybody had to grow, right? And I don't want to get too ahead of us, including Joseph. Everybody had to grow. Everybody had to grow. Everybody had to grow up.
Beth,
Yeah.
as you were talking, I'm thinking, we get a glimpse into Joseph's journey after this, but we don't know what's happening in all those years in those other brothers and their wives and their families and the conversations behind closed tent doors. And we see a little glimpse of it later on in how things are dealt with when they go to Egypt. But we don't get that inside view like we do with Joseph, a little bit closer. But all of that space, like you were talking about, like God works in the in-between in our lives, right? And so he's at work in them. He's changing. He's having them learn lessons. There's guilt. There's conviction. There's powerlessness to change it. There's unknown what happened to their their brother that their father loved most. There's his father's grief that's almost killing him. There's Benjamin who doesn't have his full brother. There's all of that stuff that's happening in their family of origin because of their decision for years. And we don't get to know any of that, but God's at work in all of that to change that.
Jadonna, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yes, that's something I that kind of
Would you please,
oh
excuse me, would you introduce yourself prior to
oh okay. Well, I'm Judana Barika from Belgium. I met Miss Beth Copeland, was it a month ago? I think quite a month, in the month of March, 2 months ago. And well, there's a lot God is doing, a lot of good stuff. God is unpacking and revealing. So I just want to leave it there for now. You'll see me more often as we are going on and talking about all these different subjects. Um, I would say it's the appointed time for me to be imparted with these type of wisdom, just to make sure the journey that God has me on, it's confirmed. So your teaching, your wisdom, it's all confirmation for the journey that God had for me and my husband, and I am in total rest. I'm total rest. So is that same in that same line, I had a question with introduce yourself. I think the introduction Joseph received in the form of a dream, that kind of was, and that's why Revelation is so important and powerful, because I was wondering if he had that many brothers and he was alone, couldn't just like Christine just mentioned, what happened in between in their life, conversation was going on. I mean, among them, was it not one person that could talk about it, and that everybody could be in make a decision to make things right? Right? You would think that if they're all in a group, we can talk about it, come with a solution. But they didn't do it. It was instead, it was the one that was heard, that was set apart. He was the one now to show their forgiveness. And I love what Miss Beth mentioned, because it's commended to us because we love him and we love others. And it's such a painful position, I would think, for Joseph, to have that many brothers, and among them not even have one, to come after him and look for him and ask for forgiveness. So it's really a powerful, story in the Bible that God is using to teach us that oftentimes, if you are the one you will have to be the one to talk about it. And I love it, because that's the anchor that we have, that if he could do it for Joseph, that is not something that is impossible. And
It's in Jerome Wilson said no conversations over here on Facebook. And, it is interesting because we've talked a lot about Joseph's relationship with his brothers, but we don't have a ton of context about their relationship with each other. Right. And groupthink, like we know in social psychology, you've got all these concepts of groupthink and the following of the crowd and things like that. And the same things that would have plagued Joseph and his brothers could have plagued amongst themselves. They had separate moms, and we don't know even how the Bible doesn't speak much to how Jacob treated them even amongst themselves. So there's a lot of that story we don't know, but we draw some inferences based on what we do. And there's somewhere in that is likely the story of, where does no conversation come from? Why does no one speak up? And one of the things I was thinking in my own response to this question, it's really funny. When I first read this question, I didn't read portends. I read pretend restoration. And so, but in a way, it kind of was, right? Like well, we're not going to kill him. So it's sort of this false sense of, well, we're restoring him back to life because we're not going to kill him, right? And so it was just funny that I read it that way. And it just had me thinking, like, it leaves the door open, because we always say God is doing something good. God is doing something good. He's doing something, a work out of everything that happens to us, through us. Um, and even the mustard seed of, even though the intent was still poor, there was something in them that said, no, we won't kill him. Right. And God took that little and maximized it for his purposes of true restoration. So even what was meant in falsehood brought truth. God brought the truth of that restoration out. Um, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Because Jessica, they're living a lie. And can we bring it real to today? There's a lie being told somewhere more often than not that's keeping the division and the reconciliation from coming forth. Um, Someone thought they had a good idea and they rallied others into it, that Joseph was the problem with their insecurity, with their not being favored, or I'm just throwing out things that could have been transpired. And if we get rid of Joseph, then we get rid of our problems, And if I can get enough people rallying behind me to denounce what Joseph's position is, then maybe he won't have the position anymore. Maybe we get rid of him and we're all free. Someone has to lead.
Mhm.
Someone's gonna, so I mean, just bear with me a second. Let's say the convince and another rise, Judah or somebody's got to lead. And then you oppose that leader. The healthiness is when truth prevails, when we
Mhm.
allow the truth and we accept God's plan, and it may not necessarily be our plan, but we trust God. One of the things I read in the and I'm getting ahead of myself because I read that later down the road. But there you go.
Yeah.
I'll
Yes.
Yeah,
stop there.
We'll get
I'll
there.
stop there.
I
Yeah.
do want to piggyback a hint on what Judana and Beth have said too. In family systems, a lot of times the scapegoat, which is the one that bears the problems of the family, they usually are the truth teller of the family.
Mhm.
And people hate the truth teller, which is why they're the scapegoat. The golden child, they show the world that, hey, we got it together. The lost child, or the peacemaker, the placater, they're just kind of keeping their head low. They're trying to navigate and be the one that greases the wheels between partners. They're trying to be mom and dad's best friend or listen to the problems, you know. And then you have the clown. They're trying to show the world, hey, no, this is all just fun, and look at how happy we are, But then that scapegoat They are the ones that show, no, we've got problems. We've got addiction. Mom sleeps all the time. She's depressed. Dad's drinking too much. Brothers using drugs. Grandparents, we've got abuse that we're not talking about. We have neglect. We're not talking about. And that scapegoat's usually the truth teller. They show the world. As therapists, we say it is easier to work with somebody who's empty that looks empty than someone who's empty that looks full, because you have to work through all of those defense mechanisms to help them to connect to that empty. While somebody who looks like they're hurting, they're usually pretty in touch with their pain and their anger. And so this family, when Giordano was saying, why is no one else speaking up? That is the structure of a family that's learned not to trust, not to talk, and not to feel. They're going to wear it out there. And so that truth telling one who's, they're the problem child everybody else hates, even if in this case it was one because dad loved him so much, no one else is talking. And then they think, yeah, exactly like Beth said, if we can just get rid of them, but then they usually are the ones that are telling the truth of what's really going on. And they're the ones that get to therapy. And then they're the ones that are to rehab.
I'll say this, and then we're
Excellent.
going to go forward.
Okay, gotcha.
When you guys were all talking, the thing the Holy Spirit dropped in my mind was wounds talk. And sometimes they talk in action, and sometimes they talk with silence. And the enemy uses them to talk more. And wounds talk because they develop beliefs, which are the things we tell ourselves. So wounds talk in a lot of different ways. They become the narrative oftentimes. And the one other thing I'll say to what you just said, oftentimes the truth teller is the curse breaker. They are often the ones who are the generational curse breakers. And so it's a high road. It's a lonely road.
Oh, see, you said that and you want to move forward,
No,
but you opened up a whole can of stuff right there, because they have been chosen. To whom much is given, much is required. God gave a lot to Joseph at a very young, immature age. But in the end, what you just said is what was the evidence later on. That's what materialized. That's what was the outcome. And more often than not, I told you last week, and I am relating to all of this because I know that you can call it a Joseph anointing or a Joseph burden, whichever way you look at it. But it is the truth of what you just said. I feel like and there's so many people that are listening, Jessica, that are really, really right now. That's why I'm so love Wellness Wednesday, that are going through these real life opportunities in their families. I know personally, but there's so many more there that this show is free. And so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, and I'm going to say this as we transition, because the rest of our day today is talking about trust and forgiveness. And so I want to say this. It's been in my heart since we started that, I do trauma work. Christine and Pamela do trauma work. And one of the things I have a conversation frequently about is that we have to release our expectations also of what reconciliation and restoration looks like, because God heals, but we are still people with a free will, and God can reconcile you and restore you even if another person doesn't change in this lifetime. And that's a conversation I'm constantly having to have, because here in the context in Joseph's story, we do see a full restoration and reconciliation. But for some of us, that reconciliation and restoration is, I get to the place of forgiveness and release, and the boundaries change. Some people will have Joseph's story, right? I love those stories. Like, I remember being in college and reading an article about people who forgave the child soldiers who murdered their families and things like that. Like, truly seeing and witnessing testimonies like that, full reconciliation and seeing the hand of the Lord. But sometimes reconciliation is, I'm set free and I have a new set of boundaries. And that new set of boundaries may be, we do life in some different ways. For some people, if that person is not willing to submit to God's process, it may mean I love you, but I love you from here while you're over there. Restoration can also look like, we have a new set of boundaries that we operate in, so we're not where we were, but reconciliation and restoration means we're doing a new thing together. So I just want to give the word of encouragement that no matter where you are in this, with your people, no matter where you are in your own process with the Lord, that we really do have to, scripture says hold loose. And the older I get, the more I understand I hold loose to everything. And God keeps continuing to teach me that I hold nothing in this life tightly, because my expectation, humans want, we are so wired. God created us to be loved and accepted and to live in community with one another. And our humanity so craves that. But our woundedness and our humanity does not always allow us to have the intimacy that we so crave to have. And so we will always want the fullness of that restoration but that does not mean we're hopeless. Even if I live a life where someone passes away and it wasn't restored in the way that I had the expectation it would be in this life, because your flesh longs for it. God created us that
That's
way.
a
Our
good thing.
soul and our spirit long for it. So I just want to say that to encourage you, because God has a plan for your heart, your soul, your spirit in this natural life that you will carry into eternity. And you may, no matter where you are in that story, he has a plan for it. It's just, I've got to hold loose. What does my reconciliation and restoration look like? And how do I just keep focused on his process with me? Because that's the other thing I would say with family. You can't control anybody else's part of the process. Joseph couldn't control Reuben, and Reuben couldn't control Joseph. They had to be in their land, in their process with the Lord. So I just want to encourage that also, because that is the thing you do. And I am going to transition us so we can talk a little bit with our last 12 minutes. I
Hey,
know
maybe just one little teensy behind.
teensy teensy, Beth, we got to talk about trust and forgiveness.
No, I promise, I promise, I promise. Isaiah 48:3 and Proverbs 4:7. Proverbs 4:7, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. And with all their getting, get understanding. Isaiah 48:3 is that you need to expect the move of God suddenly and not try to make God move before God's ready to move. God can do a sudden move, but he may allow that thing to hold on. I'll say the other part, and I'll be obedient. Say
Okay.
the other part, do and forgive. But yeah, this is
Amen. I received that word, Jessica. I receive it on today. That has complete today. My dad who passed away 3 years ago. That's on today is his birthday, and the song it kept reminding me. I was like, "Wow, you're reminding me on this day. I don't want to think about it." But then you just highlight something so important about not control what the rest of the family, the process, but your own. So I had to say yes, amen to your word.
Thank you for sharing that. So, until trust is regained, reconciliation is unattainable. Trust is the act of relying on someone or something, while trustworthiness is the quality that makes a person or organization deserving of trust. Trust is a psychological state, a decision to place confidence in another, whereas trustworthiness is a characteristic or trait of the person being trusted. How did Joseph ascertain his brother's trustworthiness? What are your thoughts about how his behavior reflects past family dynamics? We'll answer this one real quick because I want to get to the forgiveness. Any quick thoughts about that?
Joseph tested them, and that's right to do. When people are recovering from an affair or from dishonesty or betrayal, it is foolish to put your trust into someone that's not trustworthy. And I think this is a thing that often Christians get wrong. There's a difference between forgiveness, reconciliation, and restoration. Forgiveness is a one-way street. It is letting someone off the hook and giving God the right to judge. Reconciliation is a two-way street. It requires both parties being humble, repentant, and willing to do the work to reconnect. But even that is not restoration. Restoration is we are going to allow God And we often talk about to rebuild what was, and that can never be done. There is no going back to before a betrayal. But there is the Lord's ability to metamorphosize, one of our favorite words here, and to transform and allow that betrayal, infidelity, lie, broken relationship to now be made into something new, something more honest, and quite frankly, often something even better, because the truth is now on the table. And so as Christians, a lot of times we say, well, you forgive me, you got to forget. No, 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 no. When we forgive, that is a one-way transaction between us because of the Lord's work on the cross, that we can allow God to be God and we can let that person off the hook. And we're no longer having to make ourselves God. But reconciliation requires both parties to be humble, to be trustworthy, and to be willing. Sometimes the cross goes before us. Sometimes the cross has to go between us and another person. And restoration is when now we get to say, okay, not only are we now in communication together, but now together we are both in harmony with the desire to build and even rebuild something new and shed those old skins and incorporate it into something new. And Joseph tested his brothers. Are they honest now? Do they talk about their father? Do they talk about Benjamin? Are they honest about taking a cup or not taking a cup? He tests them in the same ways that they betrayed him. And they pass the test over and over and over again. And because of that, the door's open to reconciliation.
And I'll say this with trust. One of the things I tell clients a lot is things didn't break in a day, they don't rebuild in a day. And so the biggest thing to keep in mind with building trust is time and consistency. Do I over time, do I show consistent change? Over time, do I show a consistency in my character, my decision making, the choices that I make? And even though it was a short term in Joseph's story, he tested them several times in a short amount of time. There was still the consistency, like Christine just said, they did the same thing again and again and again, and that's that part of releasing expectations. We're not often going to re-earn true trust. We can, we can say we trust somebody again, but the reality is it is truly time and consistency that rebuilds the bridge in our heart and says, I can rely, like the definition said, I can put my reliance in this person and the vulnerability, because one of the things trust breaks down is my ability to be vulnerable and intimate with you is the truth. And so what time and consistency does is it shows, okay, you're showing me effective change that I can re-engage, offering the most intimate parts of myself as appropriate. Go ahead.
That is so right on target, but I need to back up to Christine. What happens too often, and I'm ministering to one of my family members right now, this very exact thing, because I've learned over the years and developed to get to where I am in interpreting this, is don't rush trying to remake the relationship. What you want to rush, if anything, because it takes time, is forgiveness piece for you. I have family members that, and hear me well, because y'all are somebody's gonna have some idea about this. I know what I'm talking about. Pretend that they've forgiven me for what I don't know, because I don't even know what I did. But they allow me to give, give, give. And I was trying to tell some of my family members, you have to use wisdom, because she got caught up with this particular person. And she shared something with her and she got upset. She went off on her. And she just did what she does. And I was trying to help her to understand, what made you think she was well? Well, because she had gone through these challenges and these challenges, and she allowed me to do this and that for her and this and that. I said, what was the trend? Just what you're saying. Y'all use discernment. The opportunity is somewhat reciprocal. When first of all, they acknowledge that they've wronged you. If they never acknowledge that they wronged you and it's always you wronged them, that's a problem. Just keep loving them because you've forgiven them. but use wisdom. That's why I said wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. That doesn't mean that you don't, if God allows you to do, support them, pray for them. I've got two people that really, really, but I pray for them every night. If I don't pray for anybody else, I'm praying for those two, because you know why? It keeps my heart clean. You can't really truly pray for someone, and the scripture says pray for those that despitefully use you, and I support them when God gives allowance, because there's indicative ways that he's allowed us to come into relationship that is evident, that is lifetime. But that doesn't mean I had to learn that I own everything. Everything is about people pleasing and such. And the only other thing that I'll say to you in forgiveness is to make sure you search your heart to make sure that you're not trying to forgive them because you're longing for what was. Christine, you probably need to write that out, repeat it, put it in the group for us. It's not going to happen. And I hope I'm not disheartening anyone, but that thing that you wanted, that you had in that relationship, it's not, and I don't mean, but the sooner I think you come to grips with what was, isn't going to happen, you allow God space to bring what she said could even be even better.
And I want to piggyback on that real quick, and then I'm going to read the thing about forgiveness. I want to give a word of encouragement to what Beth just said. Christine's right. We don't ever return to what we were, because we are not the same, right? We are not even the same person we were in that original space. And so we can't return to what was. But I always think about that Japanese form of art with the broken pottery that's restored with gold. And I think about, I always, in my sessions, especially with the kids, I would talk about how when we break a bone, right? If that bone is set and set to heal right, that bone will actually be stronger on the other side of the break than it was before the break, because that healing process has created more density in that bone than there was originally before the break. And I'm not saying we should walk around breaking things to get it stronger, but my point is that what the gift and creation that God allows, when something can heal, it can heal stronger. So thinking about what does that look like, that no, I can't go back to where I was, but the challenge of the suffering and the challenge of the change and the searching of my heart and your heart that's required may actually allow an even deeper intimacy, a deeper vulnerability, a deeper connection on the other side of it. And again, like I said, you got to hold loose, because you don't know what the story is going to look like. And we do live in a world with free will. It has, there's a requirement. We each have to show up to it a way, but God has a story for you, no matter what somebody else's free will decides. He is not saying you're going to be held hostage to this the rest of your life. He has a story of reconciliation and restoration. We just don't get to dictate what that looks like, because there's so many people involved. But I want to read this part about forgiveness. Can we have a few extra minutes, Miss Beth? Do you think?
Because we started later. We didn't start to like 108 or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to honor our panel's time, but if we have an extra 5 minutes or so, I want to close out on this forgiveness piece, because I do think it's super critical. Forgiveness is another element, interconnect with reconciliation and restoration of relationships. While reconciliation is a process of restoring relationships, and restoration aims to return something to its original state, forgiveness is a personal decision to let go of resentment. We see this, I think, from 45, where then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. I'm going to go ahead and read the second piece, and we'll put both of those questions together to close out. Restoration is about bringing something back to its original state or even improving it. It focuses on the outcome and bringing back what was lost. So the two questions I want to pose is, what in this text indicates Joseph's attitude of forgiveness? And identify any elements of history of Joseph and his family that indicate restoration. So what are our thoughts about forgiveness and the overall picture of restoration as we kind of sum up today's conversation?
I think Joseph was able to forgive because he knew about the sovereignty of God. I mean, that we saw the hand of God in his life when he was young, when he didn't have the maturity to wield the prophecies well. It took his time in Egypt to develop the maturity. I think that a lot of times there is people who especially are insightful or gifted in particular spiritual gifts. Sometimes the gifts come sooner than they're able to handle them well. And it takes that process of maturity and to see God. And it takes, I mean, Pamela shares her story. We each have ours of how it was like we felt our calling, but then we had to do a lot of living of the hard stuff so that that calling was wielded well. And we knew what it was to love only because we now knew what it was to be unloved. And we know what it is to be healers because we know what it is to be broken. And we have that capacity of sorrow, that sorrow and suffering and lament give to sit with the wounded. And that's, I think, what happened in Joseph's life. He could forgive because he knew that God was God and God was sovereign and God had a bigger purpose in it. Beth's God has a plan and you're part of it. I mean, that just has to be burned into us, because it is so true. When we look at how God often brings about the biggest change, it's often through difficulty and difficult relationships and difficult circumstances. And to be knowing that we can hold on to that sovereignty of God allows us to forgive, because we know that God is the judge and who gets to divide. And we see restoration in his family. He brings them to Goshen. He brings the whole crew over to Egypt and gives them choice land and gives them choice land as shepherds so that they can multiply and be healthy. He brings them to Pharaoh himself to introduce them and to identify with them. And you can see there's still doubt there because after Jacob dies, the brothers offer themselves as slaves to Joseph again because they're not quite sure that the forgiveness was real, that the forgiveness was really for them and maybe not just for their father's sake. And Joseph once again gets to remind them, no, you are my brothers. I have forgiven you what God meant for evil. What you meant for evil, God meant for good and for the salvation of many lives. And that's the hope, I think, of those, and that's almost all of us, right, who have trauma stories, is that what man or the devil or the media or whatever meant for evil, God can turn to good and can mean for good. And because we're aware of his sovereignty, we can also be understanding of other people's humanity and their wounds as well. And so it's a beautiful story of God's sovereignty and forgiveness because of it.
I believe that too so much that that's how I know in particular about God has a plan and I'm a part of it. That is God given to me. I coined that phrase and I will never forget how my friend that gave me, and I am a part of it, Sister Beth, she's no longer with us. She died on my birthday many, many years ago, about 5 or 10 years, but she was my hairstylist and she was washing my hair. And in the middle of washing, I turned around and looked at her and I said, Jen, God has a plan. And she said, and Sister Beth, and I am a part of it. And it blew me away. I said, that's anointed. That's anointed. And I ended up bringing back in a couple of weeks a t-shirt. And that's where my t-shirts were born from, that God has a plan and I am a part of it. And what I want to say in response to all of this today, Jessica, and I'll let you kind of close us out, but God's plan shall prevail. And forgiveness, John Bevere, I know y'all know him. So the mixing, ideas about who he is, what he represented, whatever. I'm just telling you, there's a book. I thought it might be up here, but says, I just lost the name of the book. Oh my gosh. But don't take offense. The bait of Satan. The bait of Satan. And when I read that book, I will not be offended again. And am I challenged in this? Yes. But you've got to be careful that you walk in forgiveness at all costs. Because I was looking at a couple of scriptures and I won't, but look at Matthew 18, latter chapters, Mark 11, 25, 26. When you don't forgive, God doesn't, he won't forgive you. He won't forgive me. I have no options but to forgive. What happens sometimes, and I'll let Jessica close us out to share some of this, but what happens more often than not in our hesitancy to forgive is that we wonder, where are my rights gonna be heard? Am I seen, heard, and who's gonna administer justice for me? And when we get to the point and we grow and mature to understand that God says, vengeance is mine, I shall repay. And when that can move from looking from vengeance and somebody reparations or whatever, restorations, whatever it is, and look into it ministers those three things in that what Lisa Moose guy said this morning to me is his commandment, not just applicable to witnessing, but in every aspect of our lives. I need somebody to help remind me of this. His commandment, because we love him and because we love others. Those three things. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Go to our website, GCB.
Hold up.
You're closing.
I
You're
have some.
closing. You're closing in just a second. Let me just do this. GCBnetwork.com. We're focused, intentional to put God back in business. I'm going to allow Jessica to give closing statements, however she takes that opportunity. I'm not going to go into all of the details of what's happening at GCBN. I think what's more important is what she has to say in closing us out today. So look at our website for whatever is happening there, gcbnetwork.com. Go ahead.
The thing I think about Joseph, we talked about trustworthy first, but Joseph offered his forgiveness before he tested them. They showed up in the room and he said, this is who I am, and you don't have to be afraid. And I think that's so important, because I think sometimes because they're so connected and they're so symbiotic with each other, we can sometimes feel like, I can't forgive you till I can trust you again. When in reality, we see the example here that the forgiveness was established so that there was a road to build trustworthiness again, to build the trust again. And I feel prompted just to give a word of encouragement, because so often I always tell people we forgive in layers. Like, as Christians, we kind of get conditioned that it's all or nothing. I have forgiven or I have not. But here's what's true with our hearts and the depth of our heart. I believe we forgive to the depth that we know, because true forgiveness can only be offered when we know. If I have a blind spot, until that blind spot is in my awareness, I don't have true forgiveness. It doesn't mean my posture of my heart is not forgiving, but our heart, like Shrek, our heart's like an onion. There's so many layers to it, right? And God takes us through a process. This week, I've been in conversation with so many of my clients about God's process. We are in God's process. You can't escape God's process if you are walking it out. And he knows the exact rate that your heart is ready to see things, to have revelations, to be ready to gain the things, insights he has, so that you can have a response to that. And I think about my own journey. Like, there were things in my life about my family story that had to come before I could go to the deeper place. God had to heal this in me before he could heal this in me, because I couldn't even get here till I could know that I could trust him up here. Because part of it is trusting God. I have to trust God with the vulnerability of my heart and the intimacy of my heart, because that's part of the act of forgiveness. Part of forgiveness is that I'm choosing to trust God. And so often our wounds have affected our ability to trust God, which is why we struggle to forgive. And so part of that healing process is God takes us at a rate that he can rebuild our trust in him because he is the true judge, right? And so I just want to encourage you because sometimes this stuff is intermingled and your story will be unique because God knows what you need first. He knows what part of your heart has to heal before the next part can. And we don't even always know that, right? The stuff that seems obvious to us. I told a client yesterday, I said, it's funny how we always have to process what we perceived as the safe parent, the most obvious hurt parent first, because a lot of times it was that person we thought was safe that hurts worse in a different way. And so we just have to trust. We have to release the process to God and to not be discouraged if you're like, why am I here again? Why am I having to forgive this person again? Because it's not that you didn't give your heart the first time. You gave as much of your heart as you had to give until God revealed deeper depths of your heart to you and deeper depths of his heart for you. And he may give you an invitation. Can I go deeper? So I say that to say that because reconciliation and restoration, you could have a suddenly, like Joseph did. Not that it happened suddenly, it happened over years of time, right? But it may look like a suddenly. But some of us, our reconciliation and restoration happens over a period of years. It comes with that time and consistency and the continued growth. I may forgive this much, and so it opens my heart this much so that I have more room to grow and learn, and then I forgive you some more, and I let you deeper in my heart. So I just want to encourage you to it's that hold loosely to the process of the Lord, because his heart is for you. His heart is for restoration and reconciliation. His whole story is that. The story of Jesus Christ is restoration and reconciliation of us to God. And so his heart is so for that. And just to release and hold loosely to the process would be my deepest encouragement because God cares about it. And he also cares about that person you're estranged from. He loves them so much more than you ever could. And he cares about it all. So I will say that to kind of wrap up. And um, we have a guest next week as we always do, but and Beth can share that in a second if she wants to, but June is important. We're shifting gears to sort of a different kind of case study in the house of David, perilous times in the house of David, therapeutic insights concerning troubled relationships. So we're stepping into another family to go deeper into the kinds of things that can happen in families and so this is kind of continuing into next month with a little bit different spin. Um, so join us again in June because God cares about you and he cares about families. You're muted, Miss Beth.
Looking at our next guest for next week is Justina Ford. Amazing, amazing woman of God. She's not new to the platform. She's a GCBN member and expect that God's gonna use her powerfully. She's gonna talk about soul-centered visibility for high achieving entrepreneurs. So that should be great. I want to thank you, Jessica, for leading this discussion today. I really had planned for you to just close us out. And because I knew God had given you something to seal the deal, and I just wanted that to marinate with people. So, those of you that watched the replay, those of you that have been active over on Facebook side of the house, I haven't been attentive there today, but just thank you all. Thank you, Christine, Jadana, for your contributions. Y'all, this is a big one, isn't it? It's a huge one. And I want to almost offer us as a team that we put this back, maybe just repeat or take it to another level because relationships from the family, a lot of this goes out into other relationships. So consider Jessica and Christine. And we get with Pamela about let's talk about this more down the road because, and maybe it's just relationships, even in general. We have several models throughout time that we could reference. But thank you guys so much for your patience with us today. And thank you guys for being here. Remember our website, gcbnetwork.com. We're putting God back in business. Would love for you to join us to become a member or a sponsor. We're like Nehemiah. We're doing a great work and we won't come down. And always remember, Christine highlighted this for me today and really put it in my spirit. You don't know what you did, lady, that God has a plan and you are a part of it. Take care. God bless you. Bye bye now.